This video is going to get you through the first lab that covers taxonomy. We're going to be talking about bacteria, protists, and then fungi for the lab portion. You're going to be filling in what I have called Taxonomy 1 student using the video that I'm doing up over here. And at first it's just fill in the blank, which is pretty self-explanatory. I'll come back to this to show you how this table is going to work out. It's just a different way to kind of organize the taxonomy stuff that we're going to get to here in a minute. So for the fill in the blank portion, here we go. What they want you to be able to do is identify any organisms by common name, by kingdom, by phylum, and sometimes by class. A taxon is a level in the classification system, so a kingdom is a taxon, a phylum is a taxon, class is a taxon. You're never going to have to know order and family. We're not going to go down that deep. Sometimes they will throw in a genus or a species for you, especially if there's diseases that some of those organisms can cover. So make sure you use this to fill in the blanks that were on that handout. So this is the taxonomic hierarchy. This is the Whittaker system, so domains weren't included in this one at this point. So kingdom is the most inclusive system. When Whittaker was doing this, there were only 5 kingdoms: Kingdom Monera, Kingdom Animalia, Kingdom Plantae, Kingdom Fungi, and Kingdom Protista. Within the kingdoms, you have phyla. So for example, in the Kingdom Animalia, we're in the phylum Chordata. Sponges are in the phylum Porifera, jellyfish are in the phylum Cnidaria. There's a bunch of phyla within the Kingdom Animalia. Things start to get more and more specific as you go down this list, with species being the most specific taxonomic hierarchical organization that's up here. There are some mnemonics that can help you remember the order of taxonomy there. I want to say we created some in the first half of the course, but here's one version of a mnemonic that can help you remember the kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, levels that are on there. Here's another one. What I recommend that you do is make your own, and as a general rule, the dirtier you make it, the more likely you'll remember it, and so that should help you remember your taxonomic hierarchy. Alright. This is all stuff that we've covered in lecture a couple of times at this point. So remember that anything that is considered a prokaryote consists of prokaryotic cells that don't have a nucleus or any other membrane-bound organelles. Eukaryotes are things that are made out of eukaryotic cells. That includes protists, plants, animals, and fungi. The prokaryotes are your bacteria and your archaeans. Anything that is unicellular, that means the whole organism is made out of one cell. Anything that is multicellular is made out of more than one cell, usually hundreds if not trillions of cells. It just depends on the organism, but multicellular just means more than one. For the bacteria, they reproduce asexually. We've kind of talked about that in lecture before. So when they reproduce, their babies are clones of the adults that made them. The advantage for that is if the environment doesn't change and the parent was already well suited for the environment, it means the babies are all going to be well suited for the environment, and so there's advantages to the way that they play that game. Most multicellular organisms are going to be sexually reproductive, so they're going to make gametes. The gametes are going to fuse together to make a new organism. We've talked about this in lecture as well before. The advantages to this are your babies are all a little bit different from you, so if the environment changes, hopefully your babies are going to be better suited for any environment that comes later on in life. Alright, from here we're going to start focusing on the bacteria. These are all things that we talked about in the bacterial lecture. So coccus means that the bacteria is round, so this is Staphylococcus. Bacillus means rod-shaped, so this is Bacillus anthracis. This is the causative agent for anthrax, and you can see each one of those cells is rectangular in shape. These are actually forming spores, and so there's a spore in the middle of that, but still this rectangle is one cell. Sporilla, sporillum, spirochete, or spiral-shaped, those are the corkscrew-shaped guys like this. The arrangements, these are the prefixes we discussed in lecture. So if they clump together, they're staphylo. If they are chained together, they're strepto. So this is Staphylococcus, this is Streptococcus. Okay, from here I'm going to back out of this to show you again what this is going to look like on the sheet, because we finished filling in the blanks. So as you come to the table part, the first 3 that we're going to talk about are all in the same kingdom. So when they put quotation marks into a box, it means it's just a copy of what comes above, so you don't have to keep rewriting the same thing over and over again. So what you would do is you would come over here to E. coli is what we're going to start with, and you can see it's on the slide, and you would put that it's in the kingdom Monera, if it would let you write it in here, which you guys are hand typing it, but hopefully you kind of get what I'm saying. I'm going to have to undo everything that I just did since it messed with all of my formatting here. So you would write Kingdom Monera there. In the characteristics, you would put the characteristics on the slide. So E. coli and Helicobacter and Nostoc, they are all prokaryotic and they are all unicellular. And so you're filling in that box and that box. Now, for the kingdom on Helicobacter and Nostoc, you can do the quotation marks because they're also going to be in the kingdom Monera, or you can go ahead and write kingdom Monera next to those. I will mention Kingdom Monera is an old kingdom that does not exist anymore. Again, this is using Whitaker's old system. Everything that's in this group is, well, there's arguments about Helicobacter, but these things are going to be in the new domain bacteria, and Kingdom Monera just doesn't exist. Okay, moving down to the next slide. We're still on E. coli. You can see that example is written right there. So next to E. coli, we've already filled in kingdom and characteristics. Next up, phylum bacteria. There is no such phylum, but this is what they're making me tell you. So phylum bacteria, the characteristics are going to be, these are the things that live in normal conditions. Like these are the things that live in you and on you. They float around in the air. They live in water. They live in the soil. They live essentially everywhere. So E. coli tends to live in your gut. Staph aureus likes to live in your nose, but it can frequently get into wounds and cause problems there. So now you should have that phylum and that characteristics filled in. Next, we're going to move down to Helicobacter. We've already filled in those first two. So phylum Archaea, this is actually a domain in the real world, but they want you to call it a phylum. The characteristics that you're putting into this box right here is they live in extreme environments. So places that are really salty, really acidic, really basic, really hot, really cold, places where we didn't think things could live. This is where the Archaeans are actually going to live. Your last bacteria is Nostoc. You've already got these first two filled in. So phylum Cyanobacteria. We're not really sure if this is actually a kingdom or a phylum or what, but this is our blue-green bacteria that are photosynthetic. If you've ever had a fish tank that gets an algae growth where it looks very filamentous, very often that's chains of Nostoc that are growing in that aquarium. And so this is a streptococcus that is photosynthetic and it's Nostoc, so that's what's going to go there. Okay, so next step. Everything from amoeba all the way down through species that causes red tide on the next slide, they're all in the kingdom Protista. In lecture, I told you this was sort of the garbage pail kingdom, where if it wasn't a fungus and it wasn't a plant and it wasn't an animal, it was thrown into this kingdom. Your characteristics for all of those, most of them are going to be unicellular, but there are some multicellular protists. A lot of them are going to be motile. That word means that they can move around. And every single one of them is going to be eukaryotic. So all the ones that we're going to talk about next, they go in this group. Okay, starting with the amoeba, moving on to the phylum. They're in the Phylum Sarcodina. Characteristics for that group is they move around using pseudopodia. The pseudopodia are these, that word does mean false feet, that's why that's in parentheses, but it's these extensions of the cytoplasmic components where the organism can either catch food with those or it can move around using those, and so that's your amoeba. Now hopefully you get how to fill this out, because I'm going to go back to full screen on this, because periodically I'll have some videos to show you just to help hopefully cement some of that information in your brain. So this is in real time. This isn't slowed down. This isn't sped up. This is how they move. It's catching what looks like a little bacterium off over there. So that's a pseudopod. That's a pseudopod. And you're going to see it's going to engulf that and then eat that. So I showed you a similar video in lecture. This one is just to once again show you the pseudopodia and how those little guys move around. So there's your amoeba. Shrink that down. All right. Next down you have Spirogyra in the table. This is in the Phylum Chlorophyta, and this is green algae. Now Spirogyra, I always kind of liked it under the microscope because the chloroplast spirals through it and it zigzags when you see it. Nothing really looks like Spirogyra. It's pretty cool looking. So anytime you see something that looks like that, that's going to be your Spirogyra. Red algae is in the Phylum Rhodophyta. In lecture, I just called these red algae, but in lab, they do want you to actually know the phylum name. So Rhodophyta literally means red plant, and it's the red algae. This is the one that made carrageenan so that you could thicken stuff like yogurt and chocolate milk. Agar comes from this group, so we mentioned both of these things in lecture already. Brown algae, this is your seaweed, and your culp fucus is what they have listed for you guys. That's just one particular group of seaweed. I mentioned this one as it's sort of like an edible salty lettuce. You can find it in a lot of Chinese and, pardon me, Japanese cuisine. Next up, you have Plasmodium. For the characteristics in the phylum, it's Phylum Sporozoa. These guys are weird in a lot of different ways. They don't have a way to move around on their own. They kind of just flow with your blood. You do need to also, off to the side, write Plasmodium is the causative agent for malaria. So what happens is a specific mosquito spits into you some little larval malaria bugs, and then they start different versions of their life cycle in your bloodstream. And this one, they're actually inside the red blood cells, so that's Plasmodium. There's 2 plasmodial rings in this cell, one there, one there. This one's not in ring shape, but that's Plasmodium. Your red blood cells should not have stuff in it like that, and so these guys are all infected with Plasmodium. Let's see, next up we have Euglena is in the Euglenophyta phylum. These guys have a little eyespot that you can see up over here. This is the one, and I'll show you another video of it here, that can do that contractile motion thing and kind of ooze wherever it's going. And it does also have flagella off one side. So here's the same, I think it's the same video that I showed you guys in lecture. So you can see the flagella whipping so that it can swim around, and it's also doing that flexible or contractile movement as well. This is the one that I told you can be used for, let's see, water quality. If it's good, clean water, they'll have their chloroplasts in there, and they'll be photosynthetic, but if the water starts to get too dirty, they won't have that anymore. Alright, next, Trypanosoma is a zooflagellate. These guys just have 1 flagella that comes off the side, unlike the Euglena that had 2 just a second ago. Trypanosoma species can cause a number of different problems. They're focusing on African sleeping sickness, but closer to home, in Texas, there's a disease called Chagas disease that's caused by a trypanosome. You get that by bugs biting you again, and then they kind of spit into you. They're called kissing bugs. And then you end up with these parasites that are in your bloodstream doing pretty horrible things to your bloodstream. Next up, Paramecium. In lecture, I showed you an amoeba eating a couple of Paramecium. These are ciliaphorans, and they're called that because they have cilia that are usually fairly difficult to see on a slide because they're so small, but they'll very often kind of look fuzzy around the edges. This is probably going to be the same video I showed you in lecture previously. Yeah. It's just the guy eating its pigmented yeast, but I'll still show you again so you can see it. So you can see the cilia better with this microscope, these little fuzzy halo looking things around the outside. They beat that to move water over the surface, and then whatever's floating around in that water, they can eat that. And so in this case, he's eating yeast. Alrighty, next up, Chrysophyta. This is the diatoms. In lecture, I told you these guys are like gorgeous when you look at them under the microscope. They come in a bunch of different geometric shapes, and for OCD people, they are just lovely to look at when you arrange them really well. These tend to be photosynthetic. They have that silica or glass shell, which is what makes diatomaceous earth that we talked about in lecture. The species that causes red tides, I believe this is the last of the protists that you guys have. I gave you guys the story of beaches being closed. This is what a red tide can look like from above when the bloom is very, very pronounced. Remember that waves tend to aerosolize the toxin and it starts to feel like tear gas on the beach, and so it's very unpleasant when there's a red tide happening in an area. Okay. Everything, I think, for the rest of this presentation is going to be in the kingdom fungi. Everything in this group is eukaryotic, and they're decomposers. It's going to include these guys off over here. Fungi can be unicellular. If they're unicellular, they tend to be called yeast. If they're multicellular, they tend to be called molds. For rhizopus, it is black bread mold, so if you've ever had your bread go moldy, hopefully it didn't get this bad, but this is rhizopus that's growing on that. It's in the phylum Zygospores. Zygospores are these little things that form between a couple of hypha, which are the threads that make it. So that's a zygospore, that's another one, that's another one. Ascomycetes, or Phylum Ascomycota, these are your sac fungi. They tend to end up with a sac-like shape to their body. The yeast that we used last semester in fermentation, Saccharomyces cerevisiae, that is an example of an ascomycete. And then Basidiomycetes, or the Phylum Basidiomycota, this is your club fungi, which is your basic everyday mushrooms. what I would recommend, so if you buy one at the store, it should be safe for you guys to eat, but if you ever get into like an apocalypse situation, which it kind of feels like right now if I'm not lying to you, don't eat a mushroom if you don't know what it is. There are species of mushrooms that look like this that are edible, and then there's one that's called the angel's cap or the death cap, and it is way not. It will kill you in the most painful, horrible way ever, and so just don't eat a mushroom if you don't know what it is. I think this is going to be a video of puffballs. Yeah. Puffballs I used to love playing with when I was a kid because they do that. And if I had known then what I know now, I would have known not to do that because my allergies probably got all crazy after that. But they were always fun to just puff. When you puff them like that, they're releasing spores. And those spores are basically like, kind of like plant seeds. So they'll go out and they'll make new little basidiomycetes eventually. So after this, let me make sure that is, oh wait, no, one more. Penicillin. Penicillium is the organism that makes penicillin, which is the antibiotic. This one I've always kind of remembered because it looks like deathly fingers reaching across the microscope slide. So penicillin, it looks like fingers of death. It's a deuteromycete and imperfect because it doesn't really have a sexual form of reproduction, and sexual means perfect in the biology world, and so since these guys didn't have that, they were considered imperfect fungi. Okay, so what's going to happen now is I'm going to set up a quiz that covers the organisms here. Things that I could ask you are like, just show you the picture and say, name that organism, and you would have to recognize that that's penicillin. I could say, name that phylum, and you would have to know that these are basidiomycetes. I could say, name that kingdom, and you would have to know that those are in the kingdom fungi. I could ask you, what kind of cells are these made of? And since it's fungi, you should know that should be eukaryotic. And so flashcards are a really good way to study these guys. Put a picture on one side and then the pertinent details on the other, and that should really help you out with that. Good luck.